Hi guys, I'm Antonelli and today we're here to do driver ratings for the Belgian Grand Prix, which was maybe not the most interesting race. Not a lot went on, but it did make ratings easier this week, which I do appreciate, because after Silverstone and the misery of trying to put those ratings together, I am so glad that this week was easier for me to do so. So we'll get straight into it, starting with Aston Martin, who, once again, honestly, I don't know why they bother driving the car or showing up. But apparently they have their upgrades next week, finally. So hopefully the car will be actually functional and not 5 seconds off of the lead, because that is an absurd state for things to be in, honestly. But anyway, we will start with Fernando Alonso, who I am giving a 5 out of 10. He did his job. That's really about it. I genuinely have nothing to say about this car, and therefore the drivers as well. So it's a 5 for Alonso. And on to Lance Stroll, it's also a 5. He DNF'd with problems. He wasn't that far off Fernando, so I didn't deduct him any points at all, because he qualified pretty closely, so it's whatever. Moving on. Next up is Cadillac. I'm going to start with Valtteri Bottas, who I'm also giving a 5 out of 10. I promise we'll get through the 5s quickly. Yeah, he did his job again. Yeah, him and Perez are pretty close together in qualifying. He did out-qualify Perez, but by such a small margin it doesn't really matter, so it's a 5. And then on to Sergio Perez, it's also a 5 out of 10. He also DNF'd with problems, but yeah, again, qualified pretty close to Bottas. The difference between their qualifying laps was pretty marginal, so I'm not going to take points away from that, similar to Stroll and Alonso. Then next up is Williams. I'm going to start with Carlos Sainz, who I'm giving a 5.5 out of 10. It was a fine weekend. The Williams isn't great. He also did take a grid penalty for power unit components, which I have also pulled up the starting grid this week, which I normally don't, because so many people are out of position due to taking grid penalties. So I do have to have that there, as well as my usual table that I have on my phone, just so I can fully cover where everyone kind of was in their races. But yeah, it was like a fine drive from Carlos Sainz. Nothing to write home about. Apparently there was some good battling with him and Behrman. I saw a clip of that after the race, but aside from that, we didn't really see him. Also a fault of the TV direction to never show us the midfield. But moving on to Alex Albon, who I'm also giving a 5.5. Again, him and Carlos are pretty close all weekend. Let me just check the qualifying gap between Alex and Carlos though, because they actually were very close. There's only a 10th difference in their qualifying times. It's just that it looks worse than it is for Alex, because they're split by Behrman. And unfortunately, Alex was just the one that was knocked out of Q1. But it was such a marginal difference that I'm not really going to demote him at all for it. Next up we have Alpine. I'm going to start with Franco Colapinto, who I'm giving a 7 out of 10. I think this was a good race for Alpine. Nothing special. I think they've put together some more impressive drives recently, both Franco and Pierre, but he picks up a point. I think that is pretty well done. Took advantage of, I think, some of the other things going on ahead. But yeah, a point is good, but other than that, not a drive, again, with a whole lot to talk about, aside from that very impressive double overtake on both Gasly and Lawson. That was fun to watch, I'll say that, but I need to look at it again to see how much of it was just like energy deployment, because I wouldn't be shocked if it's just battery. But even then, still a very brave move to make it, I think, even if it's just like a battery deployment pass. But yeah, aside from that, not a lot to talk about for Franco. And then we've got Pierre Gasly, who I'm also giving a 7. Him and Colapinto were pretty on pace with one another all weekend. Just outside of the points, the Alpine wasn't great around Spa, but not horrific either. And again, yeah, a nice tidy race with really just not a lot to talk about, so it's a 7. Next up we have Audi. I'm going to start with Nico Hülkenberg, who I am giving a 6 out of 10. He was just really off the pace of his teammate this weekend. Qualified down in 14th versus Bortoleto qualifying up in 9th, and then finishing in 13th versus Bortoleto finishing in 8th and getting some points. And yeah, there really just wasn't a lot to say about this one either. I didn't really see Nico at all. But yeah, just really not on the pace of his teammate this weekend, so it is a 6 out of 10. Next up is Gabriel Bortoleto, who I'm going to give an 8.5 out of 10. I think this was a really well-driven weekend for Gabby. Overall, really great in qualifying, managing to split the Racing Bulls, which I think is very impressive considering I think the Racing Bulls probably have the best car of the midfield pretty definitively at this point. But yeah, really well done, and then well managed in the race, didn't get into anything stupid, picks up some points. I think that's a very good drive from Gabby, so it's an 8.5. Next up we have the Racing Bulls. I'm going to start with Liam Lawson, who I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. Now I will say it's really hard to make a comparison between the V-Carb drivers this weekend, because obviously Lindblad has the upgrades on the car, Lawson does not have them yet. So it is difficult to compare Liam, and that's why I haven't been super harsh with racing him in comparison to Arvid, because obviously he does not have a car with the same capabilities right now. But I think it was a decent enough weekend. I think a 7 is pretty fair for, you know, he was in the mix with the midfield, didn't manage to pick up any points, but certainly not a bad drive at all, so I think a 7 is fair. Next up is Arvid Lindblad. I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. He was best of the rest in qualifying. I do think I would have liked to have seen him hold on to the position over Bortoleto in the race, but other than that, again, well driven, well managed. I do need to look into though what was going on between him and Liam at one point, because they were getting very close again. It does kind of feel like an incident is waiting to happen between the two V-Carb drivers now, because this is like the 3rd race in a row, I want to say, where they have been very close wheel to wheel, and we've been, you know, on the brink of an incident. So I do feel like that is coming eventually. But yeah, aside from that, I think it was a good race. I think he took advantage of the upgrades that were put on his car. And so yeah, I think an 8 out of 10 is fair for a pretty good drive. Next up we have Haas. I'm going to start with Esteban Ocon, who I'm giving a 4.5 out of 10. Just really nowhere near his teammate. His Q1 time in comparison to Behrman, I've just pulled it up, was 7/10 slower than his teammate. That is a ridiculous margin. I'm sorry, like that is just unacceptable for me. And then in the race really did nothing. I don't know what's happening with Esteban. I hate that it feels like every week now I'm having to say that Esteban Ocon is just bad, because I really do like Esteban, but this is just not good. I think his seat is in serious trouble now, because this is becoming a consistent problem for him, where he is just nowhere near his teammate despite having significantly more experience. And speaking of his teammate, we'll talk about Ollie Behrman. I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. This is a difficult one to rate because I don't think the Haas is very good, but I do think Ollie did some good driving. He was in the mix with Carlos Sainz for a bit. So I think overall, like, he did pretty well with what he has to work with. Obviously, it's hard to tell when the car just isn't great, but I do think he put in a good drive considering the machinery he has. Next up we have Red Bull. I'm going to start with Isaac Hadjar, who I'm giving a 9.5 out of 10. Hadjar was really in great form all weekend. Obviously, we knew he was going to be at the back of the grid because they were changing several components in his power unit. So we'll start with him being the greatest help to Max in qualifying, giving him the perfect tow in the final sector to allow Max to get a front row start for the race. And then in the race for Hadjar himself, a really great drive from the back of the grid to get it all the way up to 6th. Obviously, he got a little lucky with Norris being behind him because of Lando's misfortune. But aside from that, really, really solid driving from Isaac. I think this was a real standout from him. Took advantage of the pace in the car, which he said felt really good, which is nice to hear as well for Red Bull. But yeah, overall, very, very strong weekend for Isaac Hadjar. So I think a 9.5 is well deserved. And next up we have Max Verstappen, who I'm also giving a 9.5 out of 10. I think this overall was a phenomenal weekend for the Red Bulls considering the state of the car and obviously also reverting back to the old rear wing. Obviously Max is on the front row because of the tow that Isaac gave him, but still great start. Obviously past Kimi up Eau Rouge. I do find interesting the deployment difference, choosing to deploy there versus further up the straight, but I honestly think that if Max hadn't have made that overtake, he would have lost more positions in that opening lap and maybe would have even gotten caught up in the George Russell, Lewis Hamilton kind of situation. So I actually think him making that early move on Kimi might have been kind of a better choice than trying to make that battery work and then make the pass later. I don't know if that would have been super effective, so I actually do like the early pass. And then I think obviously got unlucky with the VSC. I don't know if he would have held on to second anyway without it. Like, I do think Charles probably had better pace in the Ferrari, but either way I think a really solid podium for Max. I think a really good drive considering the hard tyres don't seem to work great on the Red Bull either, but it was nice to see, I think, a calmer weekend for Max Verstappen following the kind of chaos we've had both in Austria and Silverstone. But yeah, overall, certainly a race I'm quite happy with as a Max fan, and yeah, I think it was a very good drive from him, especially considering he wasn't the luckiest in the race either, and the straight line speed on the Red Bull is bad, so I think a 9.5 is fair. Next up we have McLaren. I'm going to start with Oscar Piastri. I'm going to give a 9 out of 10. I think the results look worse than the race that Oscar put together. First of all, in qualifying, he was only 2/10 off of Lando, and unfortunately 2/10 meant that like he was starting in 7th versus Lando's like qualifying being up in 3rd. And then in the race, just plagued with misfortune. Actually, this whole weekend for Oscar has been plagued with misfortune. There's been issues with the car all throughout the weekend, from practice through to qualifying through to the race, and then obviously picked up damage from Charles Leclerc as well. Just, yeah, really unlucky. So I actually think the fact that he's managed to drag the car up to 5th is quite impressive, because it was really just, it felt like a struggle for Oscar through every session. So I think he should be quite happy with a 5th place, and I think a 9 out of 10 is deserved. Next up we have Lando Norris. I'm also giving a 9 out of 10. Again, the results look worse than the drive Lando put together. First of all, qualifying at 3rd ahead of Russell especially, very impressive. A very good qualifying lap from Lando. I actually think it's probably the best I've seen him look in qualifying all season, I feel like. He just seemed super comfortable, his laps were great. Really unfortunate that this is kind of the weekend he had to take the grid penalty for the power unit components being changed, because I do think he could have put together a great race up from 3rd. And then in the race, obviously, really strong first stint, especially, and had great pace, managed some overtaking, got up to the front pack, managed to make the lives difficult of some of those in that front pack as well. Particularly, I think Kimi and Max maybe would have appreciated if Lando had pit earlier. But then very unfortunate for Lando, that slow pit stop, and that kind of ended that charge for him. But, no fault of his own. It was a very, very good drive from Lando, I think, so it is a 9 out of 10. Next up we have Ferrari. I'm going to start with Lewis Hamilton, who is maybe the most difficult one to rate this weekend. Qualifying was fine. He was actually very, very close to Charles. I didn't realise how close they were until I looked at the times just before. So I think that was pretty good. The Ferrari wasn't great over one lap, I have to say. And then in the race, I disagree with him getting the penalty for lap 1. I think if George hadn't have DNF'd as a result of that collision, Lewis would not have gotten a penalty, which is very frustrating because the penalties are supposed to be given out based on the incident itself, not the consequence. And it does feel like today, especially the stewards, were handing out penalties based on consequences, not incidents. And so I think Lewis got very unlucky there. Then there was the incident at the pit stop. It just wasn't great. I also do think Lewis was the slower of the two Ferraris, despite what he seemed to believe that he had more pace and that he should be allowed to pass Charles. I'm not convinced, especially because immediately after saying that, he lost time to Charles. So I don't really know what he thought was going on there, but aside from that, like, it was still a good drive from Lewis. I just think it wasn't great. So I think an 8 out of 10 is fair. Next up we have Charles Leclerc, who I'm giving a 9 out of 10. I think this was a very good race from him. Qualifying was fine. I actually think 5th is kind of where I expect that Ferrari to be, kind of in that area. So I'm not too bothered by that. I think the Ferrari, honestly, I was not expecting it to be great around Spa. So no complaints there. And then in the race, obviously he did get lucky with the VSC, but I even think without it, he still would have been hunting. He did have good pace in the Ferrari. He, made Kimi and Max's lives more difficult in the opening stint as well. And then, got caught up with the McLarens a little bit. The incident with Oscar, I think Charles is very lucky to have not gotten a penalty for. But yeah, aside from that, I think it was good. I think he put up a good fight against Kimi. I do think Kimi Antonelli this weekend was pretty unstoppable. And I think Charles, put up a good enough fight for as long as he could. And I think taking home 2nd is certainly a very good result. And then finally, we have Mercedes, which is a tale of two halves, I must say. Starting with Kimi Antonelli, I'm giving him a 9.5 out of 10. I'm now contemplating whether I should just be giving Kimi a 10 for this. Maybe my only concern is he keeps really playing fast and loose with track limits. But aside from that, I really have no criticisms of Kimi's weekend. Obviously, he also got unlucky with the VSC with Max. The two of them pit kind of just before that. But, he hunted down Charles Leclerc pretty easily, got that pass done. I will say earlier on in the race, when he was trying to get past Lando, I do think he spent maybe a little too long trying to make that move work. But aside from that, Kimi was just easily the fastest car all weekend. He looked super comfortable once again. And I'm glad that he got the results this weekend to reflect that, because obviously in the past couple of races he's been very unlucky and the results have not reflected the races he's been putting together. So I'm glad that he's gotten to return to the top step of the podium with this one, because this was a very good race from Kimi once again. So it is a 9.5. And then finally, the most difficult driver to talk about this weekend is George Russell. I've given him a 6.5. There's a world in which I up this to a 7. I really am quite torn though. Qualified 4th, which isn't great. I mean, Max would have been behind Lando and George and maybe also Leclerc and Hamilton if it wasn't for the tow from Isaac. But I still don't think it's a good qualifying from George, but it's so hard to tell if it's issues with the car and the battery deployment or if it is a driver problem. And I think, I've been very lenient with ratings for other drivers this season if they've been having car problems, Oscar Piastri being a great example this weekend. But because the team are so kind of cagey and unclear with what's going on, it's so hard to tell if the issue is George Russell or if it is the car. Now, I do think the battery must have something to do with the race, because why he was so slow up the straight on lap 1 that he got absolutely swarmed by Lewis and Piastri, I don't know, that was clearly, you know, an issue with battery deployment there. But then I don't know why, like I get George is blaming the incident on him being slow down the straight, but I don't understand why, like, he then chose to hang it around the outside of Lewis Hamilton on lap 1 with cars everywhere. I do think that was a risky move to take. I get why, like, he's trying to not lose more positions because of the battery deployment problems, but it does feel a little like an unnecessary risk when the cars are so bunched up like that. And, like, I do think as a racing incident, again, I think Lewis getting the penalty is unfair, but it is also just, it's very brave to have gone around the outside there and it didn't pay off because Lewis didn't really have anywhere to go. Like, he had Max directly in front of him. And so it just, I don't really know why George thought it was worth the risk to hang it around the outside of that corner, because it ended up costing him, you know, 25 points in the championship now. And so I think for that reason, it's why I'm maybe a little harsher with my rating as well, because I do think there's a bit of a misjudgment there. But I don't know, let me know in the comments if I'm being too harsh with that thought. So yeah, my rating is between a 6.5 and a 7. I'll see how I'm feeling editing this, but yeah, it's very difficult to rate George Russell because I do think some of his issues is driver error. Like, I think losing time in the corners is a driver problem, but the amount of time he was losing in the straights to Kimi all weekend does feel like too much for it to just be driver error. But yeah, that is all for my driver ratings for the Belgian Grand Prix. I feel like this wasn't a super interesting one to talk about, to be fair. It felt like we didn't see a lot of drivers, and then it wasn't super action-packed really, so not a lot to talk about. But anyway, we move on to Hungary next week, so that will be interesting. There's some upgrades coming on a few cars, so no doubt the order will shuffle around a little bit again, and also it's a very different track layout to Spa, so that will also shuffle the order. But yeah, other than that, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to see even more from me, please subscribe. And if you'd like to see even more from me, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Letterboxd. All those things are linked down below, and those places you can see my makeup and special effects work and other things I'm up to, and also what movies I've been watching recently, all of that, which you can also find film commentary on this channel and amongst F1. No doubt during the summer break you'll get more film commentary from me as well, by the way. But yeah, that is all for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.